This conference.
All right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
Yep. All right, so hello and welcome to the 2019 Earth Science Information Partners Winter Meeting Highlights webinar. My name is Megan Carter. I am the Community Director of ESIP, and I will be your host for today. This webinar will highlight key events of the meeting from many different perspectives. Whether you weren't able to attend the meeting in person or you're looking to learn more about what happened, this webinar is for you. We invite you to get involved in one or more of the efforts that you see highlighted here, and we hope that by the end of the webinar, you will be inspired to do so. I can ask that everyone please mute their audio. That would be of great help. Give me one moment. If you have any questions at any time, please type them into the chat box. We'll address them later on in the webinar as time allows. As I mentioned before, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the YouTube channel for later viewing. So here's the agenda for today. Various speakers, and many speakers, will highlight the plenary talks and the breakout sessions, after which we'll invite the community fellows and others, including you, to contribute your perspectives on the meeting. The bulk of the time will be spent on highlighting the breakout sessions. So just a little by the numbers. The 2019 ESIP meeting took place in Bethesda, Maryland from January 15th to the 17th of this year. The theme of the meeting was increasing the use and value of earth science data and information. By the numbers, there were 188 in-person attendees, 6 plenary talks, 34 breakout sessions, 50 posters, and 4 peer recognition awards were handed out. You can learn more about the awards by going to the news section of the ESIP website or using the link here. Because so much content was generated for and during the meeting, we're striving to preserve as much of it as we can. For example, the 34 breakout sessions alone cumulatively resulted in over 3,000 minutes of content. To aid in this endeavor, we have asked presenters to contribute their meeting content to the ESIP Figshare portal. You can go there to view all contributed meeting presentations. Search for ESIP Winter 2019 in quotation marks to get only the winter content. From there, you can filter to show, for example, just the posters if you wish. You can also find and access meeting content where available at the 2019 Winter Meeting Schedule site. Find the session you're interested in, click on it, and you can then view the session description, a few takeaways generated by the session participants, and you will see the links to the recording of the session and any presentations that have been deposited in the ESIP Figshare portal. Of course, it's not too late to deposit your presentations. We do not yet have all of the presentations in Figshare. So, next up, we will have the plenary highlights, which will be given by ESIP's President Carl Benedict and Vice President Mike Daniels. Mike will first highlight the Tuesday plenary talks. So Mike, go ahead and unmute yourself when you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready.
Very quickly, are you all seeing, is the screen looking distorted to you?
Yes.
Okay, hold on just a moment. Let me see what that's about. Okay, hoping that's better.
Yep.
Okay, when you're ready, Mike.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I wanted to say right up front that these are my notes of the Tuesday plenary presentations, and I'd really recommend that folks take a look at the video, which all this stuff was recorded in a video that's available through the ESIP website, and many of the presentations are in Figshare. So the first plenary talk we had was by Leslie Wyborn. entitled, as you can read, Orchestrating Symphonies of Earth and Environmental Science Data and Information to Increase Their Reach, Value, and Use. You can see Leslie's email address here. Whoops.
Go ahead, Mike. I will work on fixing this.
Let me go back to my slides. So I just have some bullet points on our presentation. It was really a good presentation. It sort of stemmed from the fact that Leslie's organization in Australia, the National Computational Infrastructure, or NCI group, received a large grant for funding a huge data store that allowed new interdisciplinary research. And the really cool and novel thing that Leslie did is kind of equate the geoscience community to an orchestra, which with each aspect of science bringing their different sounds and harmonics, yet following their same musical score. And she sort of made an analogy that the musical score could be thought of as standards and interfaces. The four primary subdisciplines in geoscience she came up with were geochemists, geophysicists, earth observationalists, and geologists. Each of these was assigned a section of the orchestra, and she had some really funny stories about why the observationalists are the brass, because they're loud and things like that. It was actually pretty funny. She mentioned that Simon Cox of her organization came up with what is known as the Observations and Measurements Model, or ISO 19156. This is what she was describing as a musical score for the geoscience research that was going on. And the really cool thing is that these observations can be described in terms of a procedure, results, observed property, and feature of interest. And she challenged anybody to come up with an observation that didn't have elements of these aspects. And she described at the end that to implement standards, a person has to balance depth versus breadth, or richness versus reach. And she had a couple great examples of where she felt the balance worked well, such as AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange, and then some of the work being done in the collaborative organizations such as ESIP, E2SIP, and the RDA, Earth, Space, and Environmental Sciences Interest Group. So again, I'd recommend, if you're interested in this topic, to take a look at her presentation directly. Okay, the second plenary talk was by Christine Bandera-Goda, and it was entitled Operational Data Provenance for Anticipatory Data Disaster Planning. This presentation in particular was trying to summarize about 58 slides, or this list of bullets tries to summarize about 58 slides. So again, I'd recommend that you take a look at her talk directly. Christina was describing work that came out of an NSF RAPID grant to better use Earth data in the context of a major disaster like a hurricane. Her chief focus of research centered around assessing water quality after a hurricane, and that data comes from various sources, from individuals, from organizations, from disaster managers, etc. And the goal is really to understand ways to obtain this comprehensive information, and to find steps for operationalizing data provenance from the household to the public scales. Their primary cyber infrastructure tool was the HydroShare platform, which allowed a mix of observational data and model data. But a key point is that it put all these data in one place. Christina mentioned that during a disaster, effective social networking and mesh networks were also important, because often the infrastructure was down, and so you had to be creative in terms of how you get information. And in the end, the team learned that there are 4 requirements to making the data more useful, including private risk reduction, especially for individuals, anonymous products for use in public decision making, trusted quality control processes and communication, and then trusted organizational management. Now, Christina described many issues related to privacy, data ownership, and other topics like that I'd refer you to her presentation on. But the group has also been sponsored by a couple ESIP lab projects, including an upcoming Water Hack Week, March 25th through 29th, to kind of to work with HydroShare and show how a person deals with hydrology data and its analysis. Okay. Next. I'm sorry, I didn't see what you're showing. Okay, then the third plenary talk was from Dan Pallone, entitled From Baseline Science Instruments to CubeSats, Challenges and Opportunities with the Growth of Space-Based Data Acquisition and the Commercial World. So some of the key takeaways are just a description of what CubeSats are if you don't know. They're essentially small satellites that conform to size and weight specifications of a class of satellites known as nanosatellites. You can see CubeSat.org for more information. The really cool thing about CubeSats is that they lower barriers for building and deploying satellite systems and bring this into the hands of university departments so that they can both work in this area of research and then also work in the area of instrumentation and controlling spaceborne measurements. The launches of the CubeSats have really shown some dramatic increases since 2013, and in 2019, 500 launches are planned. Many of these increases are driven by commercial interests. The CubeSats have really launched a whole set of new industries, including what Dan called ride sharing for satellites, with a company called spaceflight.com. Sort of like the Arduino instrumentation world, there's inexpensive satellite instrumentation available from the CubeSatshot.com. Amazon is partnered in terms of remote command and control using their Amazon AWS ground stations. And then data collection, there's a CubeSatData.com data collection portal. Some of the implications of this technology are the ability to much more, agilely develop satellite instrumentation and measurements. It's really brought a democratization of outer space science discovery. Brought it into the hands of folks that couldn't deal with the data so directly before. It's brought up some data privacy issues in terms of geopolitical boundaries and other aspects of satellite. Visible satellite information. It's increased the space debris from, he mentioned, 8,000 pieces being tracked to 18,000 pieces being tracked. And of course, with all these CubeSats in space, there's much more data to analyze and process.
Thank you very much, Mike. As we are transitioning to Carl, I'm going to reshare my screen to hopefully remove those annoying characters. But Carl, go ahead and introduce yourself.
And Carl, you might need to unmute yourself. It's seeming like you're still muted.
Yes.
There
Great.
you are.
There I am. So yes, I'm Carl Benedict, newly elected ESIP president, and I'm here to talk about the 3 plenary presentations on the last day of the meeting. Next slide. From Tom Arison, Mark Parsons, and Heather Joseph, all addressing different aspects of open science, open software, and open publishing, open scientific communication. So if we could go to the next slide.
Carl, I actually only got 2 slides from you.
Huh, that is very weird because there were actually 6.
Okay.
I could share my desktop if you'd like.
Sure.
Let's do that.
Okay. You may need to invite me. I have to figure out which to share. So can you see something?
We see a lot of things.
Okay, let me try playing this.
Jimmy Buffett is playing. That's good to know.
Are you seeing the presentation mode or the?
Presenter view.
There we go.
Perfect.
So the first was again by Tom Arison from the National Academies, talking about open science at an inflection point. And this is basically providing the outputs of the Open Science by Design project that was conducted by the Board on Research, Data, and Information. And as a part of the overall analysis, their overall topics was highlighting the benefits and motivations of open science, identifying the barriers and limits to achieving open science, and ultimately developing a set of recommendations that are presented here. As Mike noted, and as I provided in the links on the previous slide, the recordings are actually really excellent to be able to go back to. And as we think about the recommendations, these are some key actions that we need to take on to actually try to achieve this fairly well established aim at moving towards open science as the default for scientific research results, which is certainly one of the founding principles under the report. So we have cultural aspects, we have training and education, we actually have designation of resources and responsibility for preservation and stewardship. We have the facilitation of data discovery, reuse and reproducibility, and the important comment that was made in the presentation there was that fair is not necessarily open, and open isn't necessarily fair as we talk about findable, interoperable, accessible, and reusable. So we need to be thinking specifically about both open and fair as we're moving forward. And this is an ongoing activity. We can't think that we've solved the problem, but there is going to be a constant need to readdress the needs and evolving environment for open science. He posed in this presentation a question mark about whether or not we're at an inflection point, and I think he made actually a fairly decent point for looking at increased success of moving towards open science in terms of the increasing availability of tools and services, the increasing public and private sponsor mandates, increased publisher adoption of frameworks and increased requirements, government activities like the Open Government Act, but there still remain challenges that need to be addressed, and when we're continuing to move towards that. So next slide. Oh, that's me. That's right. Mark Parsons drilled down a little more deeply in the question about open source software, and this was in response to a NASA request to the National Academies looking for guidance in terms of development of software policy, open source software policies for NASA and the space sciences. Again, looking at the overall motivations in terms of recognizing software as being central to science, seeing a significant expansion of open source tools, increased collaboration around those tools, and how open source actually enables that. Ongoing changes in the scientific community towards openness, and then increasing policy drivers. Based on these motivations and an assessment of the current landscape in terms of existing policies and legal frameworks, this report also developed a set of recommendations that are key for being able to move forward, including the building community norms towards open source and open source access and development, training around what remains right now still a very complicated legal environment, and the need to make sure that folks have a good understanding of that environment that they're working in developing content for. development of infrastructure to support the development and sharing of open source software, and using existing open source community libraries and contributing to those whenever possible instead of reinventing the wheels. Definitely being able to provide credit where credit is due for contributions. And in terms of an implementation roadmap, starting with the identification of key incentives, which were part of the presentation and the report, to move folks towards increased open source before ultimately getting at an endpoint of potential mandates for open source software, with the understanding that those mandates need to be unfunded, or that they need to be funded and recognized as requiring resources. But in the long run, with the vision of fostering open source software as a norm in the future as we go through this process. And our next and final presentation was from Heather Joseph from Spark, talking about exploring the role of journals in an open future. So this is now another facet of this open science, in this case focusing on scientific communications, and needing to change our focus from publishing as a goal in itself back to that ultimate goal of scientific communications. Going back to the Budapest Open Access Declaration, which she provided some excerpts from in her slide deck, thinking about open access as an enabler and not an end goal in itself. It is something that you can move you towards a set of objectives, which from the Budapest Open Access Declaration include accelerated research, enriched education, shared learning, maximization of the value of the literature, ultimately unifying humanity in this common conversation. And as a big part of that, developing an open ecosystem that is controlled by the community of funders, libraries, institutions, and societies, which is a significant change in the control structure that is very publisher-centric at this point. And the good news that she provided at the end of her presentation is that this is already happening in terms of community and research sponsor platforms that are being developed to enable this open access to the diverse products of research, the research enterprise. And progress is being made. There are new models emerging, and it's a continuous process. So in conclusion, across all of these, it was clear from the presentations that open is a broadly shared value and intent, but it's not easy, and it does take work. It takes an investment of effort and resources. It certainly requires culture and organizational change. It requires looking at policy and legal frameworks and looking for opportunities for simplification, or certainly at least increased understanding, and requires a lot of folks at the table contributing ideas and perspectives to actually come up with effective strategies. So while we have an increasing understanding of the challenge, now we really do need to actually get started doing the hard work. And the presentation that were presented here highlight that the beginning of that work and the direction we need to go. So we need to take the long view, because this is not going to happen quickly, but we're already making good progress towards it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl and Mike. I will now take the presenter view back, and we're going to try something different, which is that I'm not going to use the full screen view. I apologize for that, but it appears when I put it into full screen view with GoToMeeting, we get lots of strange images, and I don't want to ruin anybody's presentation. So a quick reminder that the plenary sessions that Carl and Mike just spoke about are actually on the ESIP YouTube channel. So next we will have the session highlights. These will be a series of very fast 2-minute lightning talks about each session. Strict time will be kept to keep us moving. I've asked each presenter to provide information on how to learn more and how to get involved. So if you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and we hope to address them at the end. So first up, we have Mike Zentner, who will highlight the session, Approaching Project Sustainability with Techniques from an Entrepreneurial Mindset. So Mike, when you're ready.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Mike Zentner. I'm an associate director with the Science Gateways Community Institute. And if you don't know what a gateway is, think of it as a web presence for conducting and sharing research. The problem that's hitting a lot of these things is this notion of sustainability. It comes up over and over again. And as you think about it, it's not just a technology problem. It's really almost having to operate a bit like a business. Do I insource? Do I outsource? How do I market? How do I maintain high uptime? How do I have robust processes and so forth? And the Gateway Institute was formed to help people understand those things and bring them into their projects to be more effective overall and have a higher impact on science. We focused in the session on several attendees from ESIP that came to one of our 5-day entrepreneur-like boot camps to learn about some of these business concepts and formulate their projects in those terms, really to end up putting together what we call a pitch deck. And you think about it as a common way of expressing what people learn about these business concepts and how they apply to their projects. So several folks shared their experience in that 5-day session, and we had a lot of questions. And I think the interesting thing is that a lot of people come in having to describe their projects in terms like a business, and it's not the Beethoven symphony that Leslie might have envisioned in her opening talk, but probably something more like Schoenberg, if anybody knows who that is, very noisy. And by the end of the process, people have a common language for talking about their projects, seeking further support for them, and hopefully strategies going forward. If this sounds like something interesting to you, we're offering another one in May. Go to sciencegateways.org and you can learn more about it. No cost to you except attending. And would look forward to having many applicants from ESIP if interest is there.
Thank you, Mike. Next up, we will have Brian Wee talking about the session Provenance for Connecting Climate Adaptation Decisions to Data.
Hi, this is Brian Wee. Thanks for having me on. The URL for one of the deliverables is available on the top of the screen, the tiny URL. This is actually so I'm representing a group of folks, including Tom Neerock, Nancy Hobenheirik, Arif Albirek, and Bill Ting. So these two together, we constitute an ESIP lab project that has been funded to look into provenance for climate resilience. And as most of you know, if you think about provenance, we know pretty well how to handle provenance for data products. The U.S. Global Change Research Program's Global Change Information System, or GCIS, that has presented a number of times at ESIP, they have a good grasp at handling the provenance between the assessments, the every 4-year assessments that the US GCRP puts out in terms of the National Climate Assessment, to link the NCA, the National Climate Assessment's findings, back to scientific publications. That's handled. What's not quite known is how do you take the last leap from things like scientific assessments and scientific journals to the decisions that people make when they think about how do I build resilience into my city. And so that the slide that is showing you, that is shown on the screen now, is a kind of a very quick overview at what we're thinking in terms of thinking about employing knowledge graphs and also extracting concepts using ontologies like ENVO out from human readable documents to build what we call a resilience genome. And I will stop right there because I'm running out of time.
Thank you very much. So next, we will have Ziheng Sun, who will talk about exercising deep learning techniques on Earth data sets for agriculture.
Hi, this is Ziheng Sun, and we have a very productive session about starting how to use the latest deep learning technique in the agriculture studies. So we first overviewed the research landscape of the deep learning in this agriculture, and found out that the workflow of deep learning in every case, like the agriculture monitoring, prediction, or decision making, is similar. All of them include like gather data, choose network type, choose deep learning library, find very powerful hardware and data pre-processing, and finally training the model and use it to predict the results, and finally validate the results with the real observations. So the most important part, the step, is building the training data set, which is the most important part, as that requires a lot of people and a lot of data sources. So we figure out that the ESIP machine learning cluster and many tools and resources in ESIP will be very helpful in this process. And we hope that people can join us, and we can move deep learning forward to for the behalf of agriculture in the future. That's my presentation.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you all staying on time. So next we have Lindsay Barbieri-Barr, who will speak about soils data integration challenges throughout the research data lifecycle. And Lindsay, are you online and unmuted?
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hi. Oh, great. Sorry. Thank you. Great. So this was a session put on by the Agriculture and Climate Cluster, as well as the Earth Science Data Analytics Cluster. And we were focusing on soil data in particular. So I've drawn out a couple of key highlights. The main things that we had. So we had three different speakers: Ben Don Lombardi, who was a part of a soil carbon database; David Klingus, who is a part of a coastal carbon research database; and Greg Wilson, who was a part of AgCross, which is more of a network of networks of agricultural data, including soil. And to highlight a lot of the challenges that were spoken about and considered were really on scaling up and scaling out of knowledge based on agricultural soil data. And this took the form of, locational scaling, so adding different locations to a database, as well as spatial scaling, sort of scaling up spatially knowledge from specific point sources of soil data to larger regional information, as well as temporal scaling, and using these soil data for multiple purposes. Why we should care, why to think about this is because agricultural soil data is really important for a variety of different objectives, including production, mitigation, adaptation, and resilience objectives, and focuses on all sorts of different responses such as food, climate, terrestrial, and water systems, as represented on the slide. So there's a lot of really great reasons why we would want to scale up and out this soil data knowledge. However, trade-offs and co-benefits might exist in terms of making soil data easy to deposit into these sorts of repositories versus the potential for reuse for multiple purposes if soil data were to be described more comprehensively. So, sort of to wrap up, we talked about these challenge points listed here, the initiatives, various initiatives going forward for soil data integration, and in particular highlighting some future directions, including ESIP summer and beyond. So definitely check in with the Ag and Climate Cluster if this is of interest. There's a lot of activity happening in this space, as is represented by the future directions bullet point.
Thank you very much, Bar. Next up, Ilya will be speaking about linking geoscience resource discovery and exploration with Jupyter Notebook.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so this session was put together by Steve Richards from USG and Columbia University, Wida Meyer from the University of Hawaii, and myself. And we focused on data discovery and its many challenges, and showed outcomes of an EarthCube project called EarthCube Data Discovery Studio. You may have heard of Synergy, so that's a successor of that. Very briefly about the project, we have assembled data from more than 40 repositories. There are 1.67 million records. You can search them by using spatial temporal search by free text, and also navigate facets. So there's provenance tracking, metadata editing, everything is exposed as ISO 19139 and in schema.org markup. And the most interesting thing that we've done recently is from all of these records, you can start Jupyter notebooks and do some additional exploration of the data. So we pass document IDs from the catalog and use that to start a notebook that would be already tuned to the type of data that you that you expose. So Steve Richard talked about data registry that would underlie this technology, and Vida showed how this is applied in the climate, in the coral reef research. And so essentially we're trying to go beyond search, beyond just search portals by enabling exploration, metadata editing, metadata enhancement, and so on. And oh, what was that?
That's two, but we'll let you finish, Ilya.
All right. So just one small announcement, data discovery competition. If you have students who are interested in helping with Jupyter notebooks and assembling collections of resources using the system, point them to this website.
Thank you, Ilya. So next up, we have Lauren Frederick, who's going to be speaking about data processing and stewardship in a cloud environment.
Hi, so we had a session about getting started and all of the concerns in a cloud environment. The cloud brings a lot of benefits, a lot of flexibility, a lot of cost optimization, but there's also a lot to think about when deploying your system to a cloud environment, and the session was overall trying to have a conversation around different issues in the cloud. We had a talk about data stewardship in the cloud, how to protect your data, make sure everything's secure there. Also, we had a talk about security in the cloud, specifically related to shadow IT and how shadow IT is expected to be a growing problem in the coming years. And then we had another talk about Cloud Tamer and how that is helping manage cost and security in the cloud. Then we also had a panel talking about different things in the cloud, security, stewardship, and then collaboration, cost optimization, things like that. So some of the takeaways were it's never too early to think about cost and security in the cloud, and also data stewardship is important to consider. And considering how organizations control access to their cloud environment is crucial for building apps in AWS. We talked a lot specifically about AWS, but a lot of these concepts can relate outside of AWS to Google Cloud or Azure or something like that. So a lot of good conversations there. I wasn't the session leader. Peter Plovchan was the session leader, so I put his email on there. I'm filling in for him, and then I also put mine in case you want to get in contact about any of the concepts here.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Next, we have Tyler Stevens' double feature. The first session he'll talk about is the GCMD keyword management process and lifecycle.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Tyler Stevens. So so in this session, we basically conveyed the global change management directory process for keyword management and overall governance of how we do keywords, ranging from fast track type keywords to more of the full review keywords, and how the NASA as the standards office is involved in facilitating those reviews by reaching out to subject matter experts to help review the keywords and provide feedback to help maintain this high quality keyword list. And also also in this session, we highlighted how anyone in the science community can help influence the keywords and make suggestions for additions or modifications to those keywords, primarily just by reaching out to us by using our keyword forum. And then kind of following the short talk presentation, we had a question and answer session about the keywords, and some of the takeaways that we had from that Q&A session were, something we always hear about, but we continue to hear that the keywords are used by numerous national and international organizations, and they're evolving as we get feedback from these organizations. There were a couple of discussions around within the CMR where there's the evolution of this human VAR model, and there's a field for measurement terms in there, and we're looking to normalize that, not necessarily by reinventing another keyword set, but kind of looking at how other groups and different communities are using measurement terms. So there's more work to be done there, and there's also more work to be done in terms of current gaps in the keywords. So some in the community noticed there's some gaps in the keywords. So we're continuing to work with these community, like the biology community, to make it more robust. And to learn more, please visit the keyword forum. The link here is at the bottom of the slide. Next slide. Thank you. So also in this session, myself and my two other colleagues, Eric and Joe, also helped facilitate this session. So this was kind of an informal type of just a roundtable session. We provided updates on the current unified metadata models in the CMR, the collection, services, variables, and granules, and just kind of give an update of where those different models are at and where they are planning to go in both the near term and long term in the CMR. And then just kind of had a general discussion about the models. There were some questions that came up, some ideas for feedback. So some of the takeaways from that discussion, the models are continuing to evolve. We get a lot of comments based on reviews of those, as well as mission requirements. More recently, the requirements for the SWAT mission, which we're working those changes into the UMM model to accommodate those requirements. We also hear that we need to be more regular in terms of the UMM releases. Right now, it's kind of a bit ad hoc, but we're working on a process to help make that more clear and hopefully more consistent. And then communicate the model changes and releases. Need a little more transparency in that. So that's something we'll think about how the best to help do that more in the future. And then there's also been discussion of potentially refactoring or splitting up UMS into different models to separate out the web service type of applications and use cases compared to like the tools and service software. So there is a proposal being worked up, and there's a meeting next month with some of the DAC people, the NASA DAC people, to kind of walk through that and get their take. And for more information on the models, have you all here on the page, you can go and download the model descriptions and see the models. And then also, any questions, please contact support@earthdata.nasa.gov. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tyler. Next up is Karen Moe. She will be talking about maturing the operational readiness level ORL framework for disasters applications.
Thanks, Megan. This session was organized by the Disasters Lifecycle Cluster, and we've been focusing the last couple of years on promoting the use and usability of earth science data for a broad range of the disasters community. We've focused our attention on working directly with partnerships, because people who are in the emergency management field, because our focus on trusted data depends on developing trust through people. We developed the operational readiness levels. These 4 levels reflect readiness and usability, and it was leveraging the TRL and various readiness level concepts that ESIP has looked at over the years. Working with our partners, we developed use cases because we recognize that relationship between usability and the specifics of the application. We're focusing next on really getting a handle on user terminology, because it's really essential that we meet our partners using their terms. We heard from Sophie Hugh about usability and Gopeng about the maturity matrix. We also heard from Tom Moran, who spoke about the Department of Homeland Security's endorsement of this ORL concept that we're developing in partnership with Tom. And we also had a really interesting example of use of ocean surge data for flood risk in New Orleans. And Maggie Glasgow talked to us about airborne assets and how you can request them. So there's information for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Moving on now, we will have Chris Olson, who will talk about ESIP's Marine Data Cluster.
Hi, my name is Chris Olson. I am one of the co-chairs of the newly formed Marine Data Cluster. A little bit of background, a couple of us had been meeting periodically over the last couple of months about talking about software and data formats and stuff like that. And we decided to turn this into a cluster with the hope of engaging the larger ESIP community. So this session that we had at the winter meeting was mostly to introduce the cluster as well as flesh out future topics that we plan to talk about during the cluster. So on the right, we took a live poll where we polled the audience for what their general interests were, and we're pleased to find that it really aligned with sort of the direction the cluster had already been going. We came up with 3 main areas to talk about: NetCDF CF compliance, best practices for software implementation, and as well as marine-specific data types. In these 3 areas, NetCDF CF is one of the big areas that we want to focus on. We want to get parameters into the CF vocabulary as a main goal. Software best practices, I think that is an area that we really want to reach out to other areas of the ESIP community to see what other people are doing and then see how we can apply those practices to marine-specific data applications. And as far as new data types, we just did a lot of work around best practices for 24 Hertz CTD data. And I think we really want to move on to fluorometry and transmissometer next. So we meet every second and fourth Tuesday. Anyone who's interested, I would encourage going to the wiki and checking out our calendar and calling in and joining. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chris. Next up, we will have Arika discussing community resilience for earth science data institutions and place-based communities.
Thank you for having me. This is so likewise with the Marine Data Cluster that this is the first session that introduces our new Community Resilience Cluster. And this session was convened also with my with other members of the cluster, including Jonathan Blythe, Rupu Gupta, and Ruth Doerr. And the goal of our cluster itself is to enhance community resilience through really meaningful improvements to data accessibility and informatics tools. And the goals of the cluster is focused on is to expand and improve the connections between data informatics and community resilience practitioners, define transdisciplinary knowledge frameworks that help support community resilience, and to explore the role of data in advancing equitable community resilience efforts. And the goal of the session was to map out what we mean by community resilience and also to hear back from participants about how our work can be better linked to existing ESIP activities. And to that end, we had a series of presentations that are listed here on the slide, and they range from the role of community resilience in federal decision-making to place-based examples of how large-scale data management and community needs can be balanced in collaborative resilience efforts, and also how scientist skills are being matched with community needs through the Thriving Earth Exchange. And then after all of these series of presentations, we had participants from the audience share their associated activities to see how we could maybe align better to those, including we heard back from existing clusters such as the disaster life cycle and decision and data to decisions. And so if you'd like to join this cluster, we do meet every third Wednesday of each month, and you can contact me if you'd like to be involved. Thank you.
Great. So next up, Erika will speak again about the session 20+ years of making data matter.
So thank you again. This session was a report out of the results from an ESIP sponsored project that was started in June of last year. I partnered with Aaron Robinson from ESIP to develop this project and to report out the results of the session. And this project seeks to understand how people's perceptions around how earth science data has been growing in importance and changing over the past 20+ years. It also marks the 20-year birthday of ESIP. On the slide, I'm showing just the workflow of how this project has been going. And the results stem from data collected from ESIP participants through interviews and lunch table discussions that some of you may have participated in during the 2018 ESIP summer meeting. And the results are organized around ESIP's values, types of culture change required to attain the values, different mechanisms used to create culture change, a history of earth science data, vision for the future, and ESIP's role in culture change. And participants in the session provided feedback on values, culture change, and mechanisms. And all of this information will be integrated into a final synthesis document. If anybody's interested in seeing the results, those are also available online. You can contact me for links to that. And as an additional activity associated with this session, there was also an activity during the reception, and people were able to contribute milestone events to a history timeline. If you'd like to learn more about this, you can contact me. And also there is a ESIP blog series that just debuted this month with an interview from Martha Maiden, and each month we'll be having another spotlight on one of these interviews for the remainder of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika. Next up will be Nancy Hobel-Heinrich, who will speak about evolving the editorial policies and practices of the Data Management Training Clearinghouse.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me here. What I wanted to talk about was the clearinghouse and the working session that we had. For those who don't know what the clearinghouse is, it's a registry of metadata about educational resources that are available online on data management, skill building, and skill building related to the research and data lifecycle. So we had pretty ambitious goals for the session to actually have people work on doing some work ahead of time, doing some reading ahead of time in order to test some resources we have available for people who want to submit content to the clearinghouse or review what others submit, or editors. And we ended up focusing mostly on the selection criteria given the interests of the people who are in the session. And the selection criteria are the definitions for what kinds, it's sort of the curation tool we use to decide what should go into the clearinghouse and what not. And we also, of course, were interested in finding other people who'd be interested in working with us as well, since it's a community-based and supported resource. But the takeaways for that selection criteria were was very interesting, because we used content that we knew we wanted to put in that were very clear cut, and then others that were edge cases. And given the discussions in the session, some three key things came out as takeaways. First, that was really important to keep in mind different kinds of learning styles when choosing resources to add to the clearinghouse, so that we not only worked with downloadable resources, but also perhaps papers that describe issues, because some people learn that way rather than by more visual resources. Then encourage the evaluation and description of accessibility features that might be part of the content that people produce, because that was definitely an interest for folks who were there. And then to broaden our understanding of what uniqueness meant, so that it's not only a concept that something is unique, but that there are the ways that it's explained are interesting. as well and unique. So other takeaways were just we found people who would actually help us work with it, work with us more as reviewers, submitters, and editorial people. And then if you're interested, both my contact information there is there, and Carl Benedict, who's my PI, with me on the clearinghouse. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Next up is Denise Hills, who will talk about Triage in the Data Ward, a collaborative working session for developing a data rescue decision framework.
Hi. This slide is very boring and doesn't really reflect how incredible the session really was. It really ended up being a great collaborative space for us to talk about not only data rescue efforts that have been ongoing within ESIP, but other aligned groups or things that have spun out of ESIP work. You know, it's like I can't thank the other presenters enough for what all they've done. We heard about efforts going on in RDA and CODATA, some EarthCube projects, update on some of the things that have been going on within ESIP, and particularly about the data nomination tool, which is a project that has some IMLS funding, and Reed Bohm is really kind of steering that ship and herding the associated cats with that, along with lots of other people. But for those of you who aren't aware of that, the point of that is to help identify data sets or data that might need rescuing, and how you go about that, and how you kind of help assess that risk, and whether, you know, it's imminent or but we just needed to get everybody in the same room, and we seem to have a really great start at that. And some common themes that also come up in some other things that we've seen is that actually sharing the stories is what's going to make it work. Coordination, so we don't duplicate effort, and so we build on the strengths of particular groups. Learning from other groups about how we might be able to pair up motivated people. And the idea of recognition, whether it be small or large, can go a long way to help encourage some of these efforts because they don't have other support for it. And if you want to know more, reach out to me or any of the other folks listed on that slide, or start attending the data stewardship call.
Thank you very much, Denise. Next up is Sophie Howe, who will speak about want to know how to delight your repository users? Usability can help.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, everybody. I'm Sophie Howe. I am a data curation and stewardship coordinator at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and I am also one of the co-chairs for the now on hiatus usability cluster. Our session is really on helping people in practicing usability using a new data service that we are creating at NCAR called the DASH, or Digital Asset Services Hub. So our goals are really to show people what are some of the techniques that can be applied to a data repository, see how these techniques were applied to the DASH repository or the DASH environment, and using the examples, using the techniques they've heard about, they can actually apply and practice how to evaluate data repository services using these techniques. Our key takeaways are basically that usability testing is really helpful, and there are many options that we can choose from, and communicating and working with our engineering team can really help us in providing useful services for our community. Unfortunately, usability cluster is now on hiatus, as I mentioned. So if you would like to learn more about usability, the cluster, or what we had done before, our wiki page is still up, and our presentations are deposited in the ESIP Figshare portal, so you can also look for that. And if you'd like to reach out to me, my information is also attached with the presentations. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Next up is Jessica Hausman, who will talk about the latest in software and data citations.
So we gave a little brief review at the State of the ESIP, or State of the Federation talk on Wednesday morning. So the software citation guidelines have been endorsed, and they are up on Figshare. And then there's also the citation cluster, which is revisiting the data citations. There should be a document coming out in the near future, and that's also going to map what citations look like against the different metadata conventions. So that will hopefully be really helpful. And then we also had a session on research objects. So research objects are kind of like anything that you would do your science research on. So we had Dan Katz from the Force 11 Software Citation Implementation Group gave a talk. Christian Litter gave one on physical samples and what IGSN2 is doing. And then Mark also gave a talk on the digital object identifier protocol. We were planning to actually have time for discussion at the end on how we want to define research objects. But there's actually a lot of really good discussions during each of the talks. And it brought to light that research objects are very varied. And while we have citation guidelines for data and for software, it doesn't quite cover the whole gamut of needs that the varying communities need to give proper credit and more information on reproducibility to their research. So what's going to happen is the software and service citation cluster and the citation guideline clusters are going to merge, and we're going to start addressing what research objects mean and as citations, and so that way we can be more accommodating to broader communities. Okay. And then for the next one, so I also have the Council of Data Facilities General Assembly summary. So that was held on Monday before the actual ESIP meeting started. So there was a survey that was put out by the CDF on shared infrastructure, basically where there's their interest for shared infrastructure, and most of the community who are within like a university type of realm, they are interested in sharing hardware infrastructure and also coordinating cybersecurity, so that this way you can share data across multiple locations, and also how do you deal with like the security issues and making sure that things communicate properly and that you're still compliant and protected against hacks and things like that. So they're planning on holding a workshop to discuss what the technical requirements would be for the shared infrastructure, and also collaborating with other organizations that are actually looking into this type of technology with like Jetstream or Xseed. And then also, should be a hardware solution or cloud or hybrid, how that should go. We also had a report out on P418, which was kind of the big project done last year on how we can basically start sharing information, like can we start having interfaces and start finding data and software and things like that. So there's been a lot of development done using like schema.org tags, trying to build a GUI so now you can actually interface with all of that. You still need to integrate with JSON LD and also be able to do new data sets. And so comes in P419, which is actually being called geocodes. Doug Phil said this, not me. It is P418 done right. So the goals are to integrate services, extend the metadata, and just be able to scale up. And then there was also reviews for the Enabling Fair project, which ends in February, but it's going to continue in COPTIS. And then COPTIS gave a review that guidelines to assess, they need to assess the data quality, metadata, and domain standards. There's also for CTS certification. For those who have been interested in it, should have been contacted by now. If not, you need to talk to Rebecca, I believe. And EarthCube proposals are due the end of the month. for office, which was pushed out because of the furlough, but core proposals are still have the same date. And that's it.
Thank you, Jessica. All right, so now we will hear from 4 of ESIP's 2019 Community Fellows on their perspectives of the meeting. And first up, we have Ellie Davis.
Hi, everyone. First, I wanted to say thank you for the experience of being a community fellow. And as a newcomer to ESIP, the amount of collaboration within the organization is just very unique and exciting. And I am the fellow for the Ag and Climate Cluster, and I also did a lot of soil sampling for my own research. So I wanted to give 2 takeaways from the soil data session. First, and these are probably universal for many of the different clusters, that it's very important to reduce the metadata submission barriers for people that are collecting soil data and submitting it to databases. And second, that to be able to get buy-in from the science community so that they'll submit, they have to feel like they care and also feel like these systems support their own work. And in saying that, if you're interested in becoming more involved with soil data standards, we are potentially putting together a pre-meeting summer workshop. So please stay in touch, and we have calls on Tuesdays at the beginning of the month. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Next up, we have Community Fellow Zachary Robbins.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you as well for having us out there, and that all the community fellows, even the ones not on this talk, really wanted to say thank you, and that they had a wonderful time. Really enjoyed talking with everyone. So I was going to report back a little bit of what happened after. I talked a lot with my lab and shared with people all the stuff we had done at ESIP, and people were really excited about just having a sort of central community in which this sort of earth science data really matters, and people are actually taking all these efforts to go to great lengths to make sure that the data is cared for and that we have all these procedures in shape. So the lab I work at uses what's called a Landis-2 model, which is a really data-hungry model. It feeds a lot of climate data, hydrology data, remote sensing, and domain knowledge to build landscape-scale processes. And people were really excited about 2 of the workshops, especially, which were the linking geoscience resource discovery and exploration using Jupyter notebooks. We do a lot of data discovery. Documentation is often done sort of not within notebooks and within workbenches. So having that method and improving that resource, we were also really interested in maybe taking part in that competition, because it links up with a lot of what we do is trying to use data science to build these projects. The second one we really enjoyed was the application of semantic technologies across earth science, the implementation of using this linked geospatial data as a way to streamline data discovery. We do a lot of focused management style simulations, and so being able to draw together a really expansive amount of knowledge on a single location would really improve a lot of what we do. So that work seems like really crucial to the work that we do. And then also using the kind of smart handoffs model, that's a thing that we've sort of incorporated into what we do. And hearing from that lecture, the Google dataset search work and how that is working to kind of streamline this whole operation so that you can have your data discovery in your data analytics within a single notebook or a single workbench and have that all synthesized together. Yeah, thank you very much.
And I might add that Zachary has a really interesting blog post you can find on the ESIP website that talks a little bit about Leslie Wyborn's plenary talk. So next up, we have Yuhan Rao.
Hi everyone, I'm Yuhan Rao from University of Maryland and the Community Fellow for the Machine Learning Cluster. We're a new cluster. First of all, I want to repeat the same appreciation that from all the Community Fellows for the ESIP community. And I really enjoyed to see the passion from ESIP people who care about data. Especially I also went to the Denise session of the data restoration, and then I really enjoyed the discussion over there. So for the machine learning cluster, the motivation of this discussion session is to informed community about our class that were new after the last summer meeting, and now we want to also gather the ESIP community input and idea about what our classes should do to help and to go step forward for the ESIP community, and then to strategize the classes efforts. So we did a full survey to see how many people are interested in the machine learning, and so the results shows that we have like strong community interest at different levels, from beginners, users, developer, manager, and even hacker. And then we also see different foci that we want to focus on. First of all, is the training materials or the overview of the general machine learning for the Earth and space sciences. And then second will be to produce some recommended practices and standards for the machine learning in the applications. And we all know that machine learning application requires both domain knowledge and the machine learning knowledge. So we want to make sure that our cluster can produce something that can be useful for the community. And if you want to get involved, you can also take our survey. The survey is still open, and also you can sign up for our email list and then attend our monthly meeting. Our next monthly meeting will be next Friday, 12 p.m. in the Eastern time. And we have a co-chair meeting yesterday, and then we have listed like 3 main initiatives we want to focus on the next 6 months before the summer meeting. So we are looking forward to your inputs and contribution. Thanks.
Thank you, Yuhan. So rounding out this very exciting series of lightning talks is Ben Roberts-Pirrell.
Hi, everybody. I'll also echo the thanks of the other community fellows. I'm the inaugural community fellow for the ESIP lab. I've included the link at the bottom there. So if you're interested in some cool tech stuff that you're working on or new tools for data management, check out the ESIP lab. I'm going to kind of step back a little bit and go to like sort of a broader level of some stuff that was talked about at the 20 Years of Making Data Matter session. It was a really interesting session, and as somebody with some background in the social sciences, we got into some really interesting discussions about sort of ESIP as a technical organization versus accessibility of data, and what role ESIP should play going forward in sort of reaching out to a community outside of the scientific data community and outside of the earth sciences community, and how to sort of balance things like session objectives at the winter and summer meetings so that we talk about technical issues. And then there was a couple of questions that had come up about, well, what about like folks who are not deep into scientific data? How could we get them better involved in ESIP? That led to a discussion about ESIP's role in maybe education or reaching out to other communities at universities or even in lower levels of education to talk about scientific data and its importance and usability. And then that also led to a discussion of who was missing from ESIP. And I guess the key thing that we talked about there was that it might be worth reaching out to more of a social science community in the future. Particularly, I think, for some of these sessions that are more oriented towards people. So like the disaster management sessions or some of the soil science and agriculture stuff. We talked about whether there are folks who are already working on a lot of these issues of how we make science more accessible to other communities or to policymakers, and that sort of incorporating them into ESIP or at least reaching out to them in the future might be a valuable objective. So that's mostly what I'd like to say. And again, if you're interested in the ESIP lab, feel free to reach out. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben. So that's a wrap on the report outs. We have about 5 minutes now if there's anyone online that would like to share their perspective or ask a question.
Hey, Megan. This is Erin. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say that I think that it was really a wonderful summary of the meeting, and there have been some comments in the chat about liking this format. And so I guess if anybody has a comment about the format of this recap, I thought it's gone really well, and so I'd be curious what others think.
Hi, Erin. Hi, Erin. This is Sophie. I ditto all the comments about how this, the format of this recap is running really well, and everybody has already said this, but it really gives a great chance to not only look at other people's sessions, but also thinking about what it is that we have achieved or accomplished with our own sessions, and what it is that we would like to go forward with the session. In particular, even with the usability cluster I mentioned with my session, that the usability cluster is on hiatus, but there's still other topics that I would be interested in talking to the community about. So yeah, definitely thumbs up for this format. Thank you, and your staff.
Yeah, and there's a question from Leslie Shee about the takeaways doc, and I think, Annie said repetition. I think that's one part of it, but I think, we also took advantage of the kind of the energy of the furlough to motivate people this time to share and be more transparent. And I know for me, it made me more aware of the fact that we were missing some subset of our community. But I wonder, for people who added to the takeaways, is there anything that made it specifically easy to do, useful?
This is Nancy. I found it useful that in the sense that there were only 3. You only asked for 3 takeaways, so it was necessary to not only really kind of synthesize what the takeaways were, or what you wanted to emphasize, but also the fact that there were only 3. So it seemed as if it didn't take that much time. So that was a nice way to do that.
Yeah, this is Denise. I'll echo what Nancy said. I appreciated only having 3, because if you just kind of leave it free form, you're going to get like the entire notes document. One thing that really worked for me as a session lead is that I really encouraged people during the session to try and capture some of these. And if something kept coming up in our discussion, I encouraged people, hey, capture that as one of our takeaways. And then as a session lead, I kind of went back and fleshed them out a little bit to make sure that we got what was really said. So.
All right, well, thank you guys. I think we'll move on now. So just briefly before we go, I wanted to announce, if you don't know already, that the 2019 ESIP summer meeting is only 159 days away. It will be held in Tacoma, Washington, July 16th through the 19th, and we're working hard to put together an awesome agenda. I'm excited to report that the call for sessions is now open, so it's not too soon to start proposing. Maybe there's something today that has sparked an idea, or maybe there's someone today that you realize you should talk to about an idea. There will also be a number of side meetings, as a few folks today referred to, that will be co-located with the ESIP meetings, so watch out for those as well. Of course, you don't have to wait until the summer meeting to stay involved with ESIP. You're welcome to engage in one of the existing collaborations if you're not already doing so. We encourage you to encourage your organization to become a member, or we encourage you to join Visioneers to help shape the upcoming meeting. You can do something as simple as spreading the word about ESIP. This link on the bottom right-hand corner is a really great one-pager that we've put together describing ESIP. It's a really easy way to show others what ESIP's about. A lot of the work that you heard about today was related in one way or another to the ESIP lab, and Annie Burgess, the lab director, will now briefly tell you how to get involved with that.
Hi, everyone. This is just a brief synopsis of how to get involved basically between now and the summer meeting. So one way is ESIP participates in Google Summer of Code. You could go to that link, github.com/ESIPFed/Google Summer of Code, and this is an opportunity for you as ESIP members to use our umbrella organization status there to submit an idea for a student from around the world to work on full-time this summer. It's a great program. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can find that at lab@esipfed.org. But that's one way. Another part is that our spring request for proposals will come up this April. You can find more information about that on the lab website listed there. This is an incubator style proposal where we give budgets up to $10,000 to work on a project that is advancing an idea that could use a little boost in funding. You could also see our recently funded proposals. Let's see, I'll just kind of bop down to the next one. Proposals that have been recently funded, also on our GitHub site with a tag of ESIP Lab. Everything funded through ESIP is open, and these are really, we hope, going to be contributed to, shared, or reused. So I'd highly recommend you checking out those projects on GitHub. And lastly, there's a lot of action happening on our community ontology repository. A lot of people don't know that that's currently hosted by ESIP. The Semantic Technologies community, kind of being speared up by Louis McGibney, has taken a lot of work related to linked data and new ontologies coming into the core. That is a community that actively looks for people that want to be developers. So I would highly recommend signing up to the core listserv. You could see that it's a list.esipfed.org, esip/core at the end. But again, those are just a couple ways to dive in over the next few months.
Thanks so much, Annie. Well, that brings our webinar to a close. Thank you all for joining us today, and especially to those of you who contributed.
And I'd like to make sure that we thank Megan for corralling everybody and for everybody that attended. Bye, guys.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, and especially thanks, Megan.
Yep. Thanks. Bye.